A legal summary, 23 pages. I can still hear the sound it made when David Ellison set it on the conference table in downtown Fayetteville that Thursday morning. The flat, deliberate knock of paper on wood in a room that had suddenly gone completely still. 30 people in that room. Marcus at the presentation table, confident in the way he always was, in professional settings. Me, near the back, in civilian clothes. Both hands around a coffee cup I hadn't touched since before 9. All I could hear was the havoc. Someone's fork on a catering tray. The particular quiet that arrives when 30 people simultaneously understand that the meeting they thought they were attending is not the meeting they are actually in. That folder contained 14 months of work, not my deployment, what I built in the 3 weeks after I came home early. My name is Monica Reese, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Military intelligence. I've spent 14 years learning how to read a situation before acting on it, to understand how I got to that room, and why the truth arrived in it with me. I need to take you back to a Wednesday night in November, to a key turning in a lock, and to a house that no longer smelled like mine. I spent 427 days in Okinawa, Japan, serving my country. I came home 21 days early. And in those 21 days, I found out my husband had drained $43,800 from our joint account through a series of forged expense records. He moved another woman into my bedroom and filed legal paperwork specifically designed to erase me. While I was deployed overseas, my key still worked. Of course it did. Keys don't forget who cut them. I stood in the doorway of my own house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and the lock turned exactly the way it always had. So I told myself everything was fine. I told myself the unfamiliar car in the driveway belonged to a neighbor. I told myself the light on in the master bedroom meant Marcus had fallen asleep watching television again. I was tired. 14 months of tired. The kind of tired that doesn't respond to sleep. So I told myself a series of small, reasonable lies and pushed the door open and stepped inside. The foyer smelled different, not wrong. Exactly, just not mine. A candle I didn't own sat on the entry table, beside a key bowl I didn't recognize. Small things, easy to explain away. I set my duffel bag down quietly and stood in the entryway windows for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the low light, letting my body understand that it was finally, actually, home. Then I heard it, not voices, not movement, just music coming softly from upstairs, a song I didn't know. And for a reason I couldn't have named in that moment, something in my chest went very still. Military intelligence teaches you that the most dangerous moment is not the moment of discovery. It is the moment immediately after, when adrenaline pushes you toward reaction instead of understanding. The most experienced people in any conflict are almost always the ones who pause longest before moving. So I paused. I did not go upstairs. I did not call out. I did not announce myself. Instead, I walked quietly into the living room. The couch was the same. The television was the same. But on the coffee table sat a magazine I had never bought, a coffee mug with an initial that wasn't mine, and a pair of reading glasses, resting on top of a novel. Not Marcus's glasses. Marcus had perfect vision. I stood in my own living room, in the middle of the night, 3 weeks ahead of schedule, and understood that what I was looking at was not mine. And that understanding, quiet and cold, and arriving all at once, was when I stopped being a wife coming home and started being myself again. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, first person in my family to enlist and to earn a college degree, both through the Army's education program, in between assignments that took me further from home than I ever imagined going. I had been stationed at Fort Bragg for 6 years when I met Marcus Webb at a cookout organized by people we both knew through the based community. Though Marcus was never military, he managed inventory operations for a regional distribution company out of Fayetteville. Easygoing, funny, steady in a way that felt like something I needed after years of high-pressure work. We dated 2 years and married in a small ceremony. We bought a 3-bedroom house, 12 minutes from base. We talked about children without committing to a timeline, the way people do when they're happy enough in the present to leave the future a little open. Marcus had never said outright that Fort Bragg made him uncomfortable, but he always referred to it as your base, never ours. At social events near the installation, when people found out what I did, the conversation shifted toward me. I told myself he was proud. Looking back, I'm less certain that's what it was. When Unit received orders for a 14-month deployment rotation to Okinawa, Marcus told me not to worry. He told me he would hold everything together, that I should focus on the work, that the house, the finances, the bills, the ordinary maintenance of a life were all handled. He used the word handled. 12 months from now, he said, you'll come home and nothing will have changed. He was right about the timeline. He was wrong about everything else. I flew back to Fayetteville, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The rotation had been shortened due to a personnel restructuring, and rather than waiting at a transit base, I requested immediate travel orders. My first sergeant approved them without hesitation. I did not call Marcus. It was 11 at night when I landed. I wanted to surprise him. I thought it would be a good surprise. Standing in my living room, looking at a coffee mug with a stranger's initial on it, I made a decision that went against every instinct and honored every piece of training I had accumulated in 14 years of military service. I did not react. I walked quietly back to the foyer, picked up my duffel, and carried it down the hall to the spare bedroom. The door was closed. I turned the handle slowly and eased it open. The room was full of boxes, not moving boxes, not storage boxes, my boxes. I could tell because my grandmother's quilt was folded on top of one of them, because the photograph of my basic training graduation, the one I had kept on the nightstand since the year I got it, was propped against the wall, wrapped in a piece of paper, as though someone had removed it from samsar and placed it here out of sight, because the box nearest the door was labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. The label said simply, Monica's Things. Someone had decided I was a category, a box to be labeled and set aside. I set my duffel down beside the closet. I sat on the edge of the bed. The room smelled like it hadn't been opened in a while. My things smelled like storage and absence. I needed more. And I needed to gather it quietly, without alerting anyone that I was gathering it. I picked up my bag, walked back to the front door, and left my house for the second time in 10 minutes. I called a rideshare from the porch, stood on the lawn that I had planted the summer after we bought the house, and waited in the dark. The light in the master bedroom was still on. The unfamiliar car was still in the driveway. I did not look back. I booked a hotel room near I-95 and checked in without emotion. The way you check into billets at a transit base. Functional, temporary, necessary. The woman at the front desk asked me how many nights. I said I wasn't sure yet. She handed me 2 key cards without a single follow-up question, which I chose to read as a sign of good character. One of the cards worked on the first try. Small victories. The following morning, I sat at the hotel desk with a legal pad and wrote down every fact I had, not what I thought, not what I feared. Facts: the coffee mug, the magazine, the reading glasses, the boxes, the car in the driveway. My belongings removed from the main bedroom and placed in the spare room, labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Each of these things was a fact, what they meant taken together. I was not yet prepared to formalize. I changed into civilian clothes and drove the rental car I picked up that morning back to my neighborhood, not to the house, to the coffee shop 2 streets over, where I had spent many Saturday mornings before deployment. I ordered a coffee and found a table with a clear sightline to the street. At 8:15, a woman I had never seen, walked out of the front door of my house. She was in her early 30s, carrying a tote bag and a travel coffee cup. She wore the kind of comfortable familiarity that comes from living somewhere for a long time. Not visiting, living, she got into the unfamiliar car, backed out of the driveway, my driveway, and left. At 8:40, Marcus came out in his work clothes. He stood on the porch for a moment, checking his phone, then got into his truck, a new one, I noticed, that hadn't been in the driveway when I left 14 months ago, and drove away. I watched all of it from a coffee shop table. Both hands wrapped around my cup. I said nothing. I was counting. Over the next 4 days, I watched. I had done this kind of observational work in a professional capacity, more times than I could count. Watching is not passive. It requires discipline, patience, and the ability to set aside what you want to be true in favor of what is actually in front of you. I had not anticipated that the first time I deployed these particular skills in Fayetteville would be from a corner table at a coffee shop, surveilling my own house over a medium roast. The Army's training materials probably did not anticipate this either. The pattern became clear within 48 hours. The woman arrived late morning on 2 of the 4 days. She used a key. On the second day, she left carrying grocery bags, which meant she had been inside long enough to have a reason to come back out. On the third day, both she and Marcus came out together, got into his truck, and left. I sat with these observations. I wrote them down. I did not yet know who she was. I did not yet know how long this had been happening. But I knew what I was looking at. And I knew it was not new. On the 4th evening, I called the one person I trusted to help me think clearly. Her name was Corporal Denise Watts, former Army, now retired, living in Raleigh. We had served together for 4 years at Fort Bragg. Before her discharge, Denise was 2 years older than me and approximately a decade more practical. She answered on the first ring, because she always did. And when I told her what was happening, she did not express shock or offer sympathy. She asked 3 questions. How long have you been observing? 4 days. Do you have a lawyer? No. Do you have access to your own financial accounts right now? I hadn't checked. I checked while we were on the phone. My personal savings account, the one I had maintained under my own name for my entire service career, was unchanged. But the joint savings account, the one Marcus and I had opened together 2 years after buying the house, the one where we both deposited money monthly as a shared financial foundation, showed a balance significantly lower than I expected. I pulled up the transaction history. Then I pulled it up again, because what I was seeing required verification. April 3rd, $3,200, home repairs. May 17th, $4,800, property upkeep. July 9th, $2,000, $750, maintenance. August 28th, $4,200, home repairs. October 14th, $3,900, property upkeep. The first 4 months, amount small enough to have explanations. The next 6, larger, more frequent, the memo fields growing bolder. By month 10, someone had filed paperwork in my name to a P.O. box I never used. 31 transactions over 14 months, $43,800. At 2:14 in the morning, I was still at the hotel desk, still looking at the screen. The room was dark except for the glow of my laptop. The coffee I'd made from the in-room machine at midnight had gone cold beside me. I did not call anyone. I wrote the numbers down in the order they had occurred, and then I wrote them again. And then I opened a new page and started mapping what they meant. Denise had stayed on the line when I'd first found them, mostly quiet. Then she said, "Monica, you need a family attorney before you do anything else." I agreed. She gave me a name and a phone number from memory, which told me she had been waiting to give them to me. I made the call the following morning. Her name was Attorney Carol Hutchins. a family law specialist in Fayetteville, with 23 years of practice. Her office was small and practical. Walls lined with filing cabinets, a single plant on the windowsill that had clearly outlasted several of her more dramatic cases, possibly by cultivating very low expectations. When I walked in wearing my dress uniform, she looked at me the way people who have worked near Fort Bragg for 2 decades look at military personnel, with straightforward respect and without ceremony. I laid out the facts in the same order. I had written them on my legal pad. Carol listened. She took notes. She asked for the bank transaction records, which I had printed that morning. When I slid the stack across her desk, 47 pages of transaction history, annotated, she reviewed them without comment for several minutes. Then she asked whether the house had any active liens or refinancing activity. I said I wasn't sure. Deployments had a way of making you trust the person you left in charge. She looked at me directly. Then let's find out together. Over the next 3 days, Carol's office pulled the property records. The house had no active refinancing. That was the first relief. But what they found instead was its own kind of damage. The joint savings account withdrawals, when viewed against the actual history of the property, showed no corresponding home repairs. Not $1 of documented improvement or maintenance. Carol's investigator contacted the 2 contractors Marcus had listed as vendors in the memo. Fields. One had no record of any job at our address. The other had completed a single small repair worth $400, 18 months before the deployment even began. $43,800. Gone. With documentation constructed to look legitimate and substance that was entirely fabricated, Carol set the papers down. "Monica," she said, "this is wire fraud within a marital estate. And given the military component, it carries additional legal implications." My unit's legal office would also be interested, she explained, because unauthorized access to a service member's household financial accounts during deployment falls under federal protections the Army takes seriously. Very seriously. I nodded. In military intelligence, you learn to prepare yourself for the confirmation of things you already suspected. The emotion comes later. The work comes first. The work, right now, involved understanding the full picture. Because there was still a question I hadn't answered. The woman in my house. The boxes in my spare room. These weren't the marks of a secret being kept. They were the marks of a replacement. And a replacement requires the original to be absent, officially and permanently. Carol answered that question 2 days later. Marcus had filed separation paperwork 3 months into my deployment, not divorce, separation, filed to a post office box address I didn't use, which meant it had technically been served. And I had technically not responded, generating a legal record of my non-participation. The paperwork was there, the foundation for removing me from the picture cleanly, legally, while I was 11 time zones away doing my job. Carol looked at me across her desk. "He was building toward something," she said. "He just hadn't finished building it yet." She paused. "Someone coached him on this." Monica. Carol's investigator traced the separation filing to an attorney named Richard Goss, a family law practitioner whose office sat 3 miles from the distribution company where Marcus worked. The same office, the investigator noted, had also filed a request 4 months into my deployment to update the mailing address on record for me. The update that redirected all legal correspondence to the P.O. box I never opened. Both documents bore the same notarization stamp. Carol set them side by side on her desk without comment. She didn't need to comment. I thought about that for a long time after I left her office. Then I stopped thinking about it, because understanding the shape of a betrayal, fully and clearly, is necessary. Dwelling in it endlessly is a different thing, and I had never been someone who confused the two. Carol filed an immediate response to the separation paperwork. which effectively suspended any further proceedings. She also filed a formal complaint with the court regarding the wire fraud and its fabricated documentation. Additionally, I contacted the JAG office at Fort Bragg, which opened its own parallel inquiry. These things were set in motion, and then I waited. In the meantime, Denise drove up from Raleigh on a Thursday evening and brought me dinner and sat across from me at the hotel's table and said almost nothing useful and almost everything necessary. She told me about her own divorce 7 years earlier. She told me she had not eaten properly for 3 months after. She told me she had cried in her car in parking lots on days when she felt strong everywhere else. The parking lot thing is a real phenomenon, she said. I recommend a good drive-through right after. Proves you're still functional. She told me these things mattered, not to normalize the pain, but to remind me that I was allowed to have it. I told her I wasn't sure what I felt yet. She said that sounded exactly right. If you have someone like Denise in your life, someone who answers on the first ring, asks the 3 right questions, and drives an hour to bring you food, you know why I needed to tell this story out loud. If it's reaching you, share it with someone who may need this reminder today, because the part that changed everything hasn't happened yet. A week after Carol's filing, Linda Marsh called. Linda had been Marcus's administrative coordinator at the distribution company for 8 years. She was 54 years old, had 3 grown children, and had watched things unfold at that workplace for months, with increasing discomfort. When she heard through a mutual acquaintance, Fayetteville is smaller than it looks, that I was back, and that legal proceedings had begun, she reached out. Her voice was careful when she called. She said she wanted to tell me something. She should have found a way to say sooner. I told her I was listening. She said that Marcus had been telling people at his company that we had separated, that his girlfriend had attended 2 company events as his partner, that at a recent company all-hands meeting, when the regional VP asked about his family, Marcus had mentioned being separated from his wife and moving forward with a new relationship, that the VP had expressed sympathy and support in front of the entire room. She also mentioned that Marcus had purchased a new truck in the months after my deployment began, paid cash, and had contracted a kitchen renovation at the house around the same time. She had thought nothing of it then. Then Linda mentioned something else, almost as an aside. In the months after I deployed, Marcus had started describing himself at work as the one holding everything together. She said it in a way that made clear. She hadn't quite believed it then either. Then she told me something that shifted my thinking. The company was scheduled, in 2 weeks, to host a major vendor evaluation event. All regional managers were expected to present their operational results to the corporate oversight team from headquarters. The company was being assessed for a significant expansion contract. Marcus's performance review was part of that assessment. I thanked Linda. Then I sat with that information for a long time. I was not thinking about retribution. I was thinking about context, about the fact that a man who had spent 14 months misrepresenting his financial conduct, his legal circumstances, and his domestic life, was about to walk into a room where his professional integrity would be evaluated by people who had no idea what they were actually evaluating, and about whether those people deserved to have accurate information before they made their decision. Carol agreed that the pending legal proceedings were a matter of public record, and that I had every right to ensure they were available to any party with legitimate interest. She prepared a factual summary document, 23 pages, no editorializing, no accusations, just the documented proceedings, their nature, their financial specifics, and their current status. The document didn't speak for me. It let the numbers speak. They said everything that needed to be said. There were hard evenings in that period. Nights when I sat in the hotel room, looking at the transaction records. April 3rd, May 17th, July 9th. The list continuing down the page, like a calendar of decisions made while I was somewhere else entirely. My right knee ached the way it always did when I sat still too long. A training injury from 2018 that had never fully settled, and I let it. Denise had given me permission to feel what needed to be felt. I used that permission on a schedule, gave those things the time they needed, then closed them like a briefing file, and went back to the work. That is not the same as suppressing them. It is choosing when they get to have the floor. In military intelligence, there is a difference between practice and preparation. Practice is repetition. Preparation is readiness. I spent the remaining days before the evaluation in preparation. I reviewed every document. I confirmed every fact. I ensured that everything I was prepared to say, I could prove. I was not going to that room to cause harm. I was going to make it impossible for the truth to be absent from a space where it belonged. The evaluation event was held at a hotel conference center in downtown Fayetteville on a Thursday morning. Regional managers, corporate representatives, and senior vendors occupied 3 long tables arranged in a horseshoe. Marcus was scheduled to present fourth. I arrived early and took a seat near the back of the room, in my civilian clothes. Nothing about my appearance announced anything. I was one person among 30. Marcus entered with his team at 8:55. He was confident in the way he was always confident, in professional settings, a quality I had once found reassuring and now understood differently. He set up his materials at the presentation table, without scanning the room. Why would he? I was 11 time zones away. I was the variable he had already accounted for. Then he looked up, and he saw me. The shift in him was immediate and unmistakable, not visible to most people in the room, visible to someone who had spent 14 years reading behavioral indicators in high-stakes environments. His shoulders adjusted. His hands changed their position on the table. He blinked once, slowly, and then controlled his expression into something practiced and neutral. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then I looked away. The presentations proceeded. When Marcus's turn came, he stood and opened by acknowledging, briefly, that he had navigated some significant personal changes that year. He said they had, if anything, clarified his focus on the work in front of him. The regional VP nodded. Several people made the kind of face people make when they're offering silent support. Then he moved into his operational report. His numbers were solid. His presentation was smooth. Marcus had spent 14 months constructing something that looked like a life. I had spent 14 months constructing something that could prove it wasn't. The difference between us, in that room, was the difference between performance and documentation. One of those things holds up under scrutiny. The other doesn't. Then David Ellison raised his hand. He set the summary on the table, the flat, deliberate knock of 23 pages finding a surface. He said he had a procedural matter he wanted to address before the evaluation continued. He mentioned that his office had received notification of active civil proceedings involving one of the presenting managers. He looked down at the document, then back up. 31 withdrawals, 14 months, wire fraud. All I could hear in the silence that followed was the ajac. Someone's fork on a catering tray. The quiet. The room changed the way rooms change when everyone in them suddenly understands that the meeting they thought they were attending is not the meeting they are actually in. Marcus looked at me again. This time his expression was not controlled. This time I saw the actual person underneath the performance, and he looked exactly the way I had expected him to look. Small, caught, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, he said, in a voice that was much quieter than any voice he had used in that room so far, that he would prefer to address the matter privately. David Ellison nodded. The evaluation session was paused. An offline meeting was arranged. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. My part was finished the moment the truth arrived in that room. It did not need my help after that. I stood up, walked out into the hotel corridor, and found a chair near a window, overlooking the parking lot. I sat there for a while in the morning light. Denise called. She asked how I was. The number said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a pretty good kind of fine. Yeah, I said. I think it might be. The formal legal proceedings moved at the pace legal proceedings always move, slowly and without drama. Carol was patient with me when I grew frustrated with the timeline. She reminded me that slow processes built on solid documentation tend to hold. Quick processes built on anger tend to fall apart. The separation paperwork was contested successfully on the basis of improper service. The wire fraud documentation was presented to the court and referred additionally to the relevant military legal authority, given the deployment component. On March 14th of the following year, a civil judgment was entered for full restitution of $43,800 plus legal costs, $51,240 in total. Marcus did not contest it. On April 2nd, the truck purchased with proceeds from the withdrawals was repossessed to satisfy the judgment lien. The kitchen renovation contractor placed a lien on the property. The joint savings account dispute was formally closed 4 months after my return. At the distribution company, Marcus remained employed, but was passed over for the expansion contract assignment his performance had been evaluated for. David Ellison's office had conducted its own review. Following the evaluation event, the results of that review were their business, not mine. The woman in my house, whose name I eventually learned was Tara, moved out within 2 weeks of the proceedings becoming active. I am not going to spend words on her. She was a feature of a situation she perhaps understood better than I would ever know. And what she understood or didn't understand is her own accounting to make. I have nothing further to say about Tara. I moved back into my house 6 weeks after returning from Okinawa. The boxes in the spare room took me one evening to unpack. I found my grandmother's quilt and folded it properly and put it back in the cedar chest where it had always been. I found the graduation photograph and set it back on the nightstand. These were small acts. They took less than an hour. But they mattered in the way that small, correct acts of restoration always matter. Marcus and I completed the divorce 10 months after my return. There was one meeting toward the end, where Marcus and I sat on opposite sides of a conference table for 40 minutes, while our lawyers talked through remaining asset questions. We did not speak directly. When I stood to leave, Marcus said my name once, just Monica. I turned and waited. He looked at me the way people look when they have been preparing to say something and have lost their nerve at the last moment. He didn't say anything else. I nodded once and walked out. In the corridor, I passed him for the last time. The company lanyards still around his neck, the same one he'd worn to every professional event for 6 years. I thought about the last company gathering before my deployment, when the regional director had shaken my hand and said, "It must be extraordinary work, what you do." Marcus had been standing next to me. He hadn't said anything on the drive home, just driven. I had told myself it was tiredness. It wasn't tiredness. When the divorce was finalized, I signed the papers in Carol's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and then I drove to the barbecue restaurant I had been going to since my first year in Fayetteville and ordered brisket and sat alone at a corner table. I ate slowly, no legal pad, no transaction records, no notes, just brisket and late afternoon light and the particular freedom of a finished thing. I was promoted to Sergeant First Class 8 months later. The promotion ceremony was held at Fort Bragg on a warm spring Friday. Denise drove up from Raleigh. My sister came from Charlotte with her daughter. who is 7 years old and was extremely interested in the rank insignia, the ceremony, and whether she could try on the hat. She could not try on the hat. She remained undeterred about this for the rest of the afternoon. My unit commander gave a brief speech about the qualities that earn advancement in military intelligence: patience, precision, and the discipline to act only when the information is complete. He was talking about professional competencies, but I sat with those words in a personal way. Patience, because 14 years of service had required it daily. Precision, because precision had never been a thing I could afford, and had served me well in the weeks after coming home. And the discipline to act only when the information is complete. Because the moment I stepped into my house on that Wednesday night and smelled something unfamiliar, the easiest thing would have been to react. To walk upstairs and make a scene and give away every advantage I had. To let emotion move faster than understanding. Instead, I had waited, I had observed, I had built the file. And because of that, when I did move, I moved with everything I needed, and nothing I didn't. I still live in the house near Fort Bragg. I finished paying off the mortgage 2 years ahead of schedule, using the restoration settlement. The yard has a raised garden bed in the back corner that I built myself last spring, badly at first and better as I went. The kitchen has been repainted a deep terracotta that looks the way Arizona evenings look in photographs. My sister visits often. Denise comes up every few months. We eat at the barbecue place. Sometimes we talk about what happened. Mostly we talk about other things. I still serve. The work of military intelligence is the work of understanding things accurately, of separating what is true from what only appears to be true, of holding the full picture clearly before drawing conclusions. I have found, in the years since Okinawa, that this is also a reasonable approach to living a life. One evening last fall, I came home late from base. I parked in the driveway in the dark, walked to the front door, and put my key in the lock. It turned the way it always had. The same key. The same lock. The same door. Except this time, when it opened, the house smelled like mine. My candle on the entry table. My jacket on the hook. The photograph of my basic training graduation, back on the nightstand where it had always been. The same threshold, an entirely different life. The night I sat in the spare room of my own house, surrounded by boxes labeled in a stranger's handwriting, that is the one I carry. The smell of storage on my grandmother's quilt. The photograph of my graduation wrapped in paper, as though it needed to be protected from being seen. I had come home 3 weeks early. I had walked through the door quietly instead of announcing myself. And I had found the truth before it could be finished being buried. The numbers were always there. I just made sure the right people could read them. I didn't move fast. I moved correctly. And patience, quiet, deliberate, documented patience, is the only key that matters when the truth needs a room to enter. Sometimes life gives you those 3 weeks. Sometimes it doesn't. If you get them, use them. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who may need this reminder today. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between reacting immediately and waiting until you truly understood what you were dealing with? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one,